I would now pass the floor to the chair, Dr. Farouk.
All right, thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Today we are at session 5, Muslim World Bigger Picture. We have 3 prominent speakers over here. Dr. Husnul Amin from Pakistan. We have Dr. Özlem Yilmaz from Turkey and Dr. Tauhidul Islam from Bangladesh. We'll start probably first with Dr. Husnul Amin. Dr. Husnul Amin is a research fellow at the Stockholm University in New Jersey. So he'll be talking about social non-movement in Muslim majority countries. Thank you. Please.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum. So in the interest of time, I think we should be quick and prompt. So my discussion is about social non-movements, specifically in Pakistan, but I will be reflecting occasionally about other Muslim countries as well. So the basic framework comes from Professor Asif Bayat, who is a political sociologist and expert Middle Eastern studies. He talks about, he is distinguishing social non-movements from social movements in the sense that social movements are larger mobilizations having bureaucratic structures, very clearly defined goals, and agenda, etc. But the social non-movements are very isolated, kind of dispersed, individualized instances of activism, which can be both in the sphere of culture, religion, religious reform, politics, identity, etc., etc. So that is actually the basic discussion I would like to initiate from. Yeah, is it? Is it okay now? No. Yeah. So, since the researchers, radar screen, as well as the media is mostly interested in larger mobilizations and social movements, political protests. So the smaller pockets of resistance and activisms are normally escaped from the radar screen of researchers as well as the media. Specifically, for example, Bayat actually talked about, some of the social non-movements which occurred before the Arab Spring, the emergence of Arab Spring, which actually led to several revolutionary kind of mobilizations in the Middle East, in the Arab Middle East. Next, please. I just captured this photo of Ali Salman, and so the table is actually important. A social non-movement, just to make it relevant to the Islam and liberty discussion, if it is enhancing the second column, those freedoms, if I use Amartya Sen's freedoms and unfreedoms concept, so if it is enhancing and expanding those, then that is actually contributing to empowerment, liberating voices in Muslim societies. If it is doing the other way around, then it is actually, restricting and constraining the freedoms in the domain of culture, politics, and economy. Next, please. So I will be discussing some empirical examples. Let me add here that, social non-movement is a category of analysis. So we may disagree on the definitions, and we may call some social movements as non-movements, and a non-movement may be in the phase of a social movement. But I want to make my point that these are some isolated pockets of resistance, reforms, revisions, and revisiting, for example, religious text, and not covered by the mainstream social movements. So we can drop the social non-movement category after the analysis. It's a Weberian ideal type, you can say, and after using it, you can just drop it off. Next, please. The first example, next, please. Yeah. It comes from, you know, the Pak-Afghan border, which has been in conflict since long, and the people living there are called the tribal Pashtuns. Speaking Pashto language, the tribes are living on this side of Pakistan and the other side of Afghanistan. So across the border, being tribal, being Pashtun, they are constructed as, you know, conservative and socially, politically, religiously. And the second assumption has been, you know, unverified assumption among the anthropologists, specifically the colonial anthropologists, you know, that these are extremist, conservative tribes who cannot have social movements peacefully, but they can only have violence and violent movements. So the first movement which I am going to discuss, non-movement, is actually the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, which is actually the Pashtun protection movement. So just to give you an example, you can call it, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement in the US. So the basic slogan is that the Pashtun lives matter. So it is not that always they will be used as instruments in the jihadi projects. The first project was against the USSR, and, you know, then it was in Kashmir and different places. So this whole discussion was, you know, it emerged from within the youth, the groups, the new youth, the tribal Pashtun youth. The distinguishing feature of this mobilization is that they are non-violent completely. They are focusing on rights-based activism and the rights, you know, guaranteed in the Pakistani constitution. So, you know, redefining several identity issues related to their ethnic identities as well as Islam, as well as the Pakistani identity as well. So the discussions actually emerged when I was looking at these discussions as a Fulbright fellow. So it was in the non-movement phase that time, although it has become a movement now. And the non-movement phase was mostly, I call it the pre-genesis phase of the movement. That time in the domain of culture, poetry, you know, music, and discussions, deliberative discussions, mostly held in the university campuses, around teachers and scholars, study circles, debunking, you know, the narrative of official jihad, which whatever was given to them as the only narrative of jihad. So they debunked, they disowned that narrative as well. So this was a huge transformation among the Pashtun youth, and this activism actually, you know, escaped both researchers and the media radar screen. The reason was it was a non-movement. It was not visible to the public, and it was in the public sphere and the public square as well, but it was initially considered as something going on in the culture, the domain of culture, music, poetry, etc., etc. But, you know, it was giving voice to the tribal youth and making its inroad into politics as well. Next. The second discussion is about the literary, you know, festivals. I think Dr. Saeed recently attended one in Birmingham or somewhere, Manchester. And there is a huge activism started in Pakistan. So book readings and festivities, music, etc., but the actual discussions is actually going on behind the book reading circles. So there are book launches, you know, poetic discussions, literary discussions, but there is a discussion on defense budget, for example. there is discussion on violence, there is discussion on strategy, etc., etc. So there is always critical scholarship invited to those discussions which is actually otherwise not possible. But these discussions have led to a great momentum within the sphere of literature and artistic expressions. And now every city, major city, is having its own literary festival. And that is annually done mostly in March and April during the spring season. So Karachi, Lahore, Peshawar, and if you just have a look at the contents and the topics which are discussed in those literary circles, you will see that there is an amazing, variety of and diversity of discussions on politics, culture, economy, religion, religious reform, gender, minorities, and that. So this is the second example which I wanted to discuss. The third scholar who lived in Malaysia for 10 years in exile, his name is Javed Ahmad Ghamidi. He recently moved to US, settled in Dallas, and he is an ex-Islamist. So he was Maududi and Jamaat Islami at that time, and then he was expelled from that movement. And then he started, what he calls the reconstruction of Islamic thought. And when I was asking this question, coming back to essentials, so he is raising actually basic questions. And sometimes you may call it essentialism as well. But he is saying that actually there are several problems in the Islamic religious thought. Not in Islam, not in Quran and Sunnah, but whatever has been the understanding, there are so many issues, and so that needs to be reconstructed. So that's why he is going beyond, the compilation of fiqh, tadween fiqh, and he is moving into what Muhammad Iqbal wrote in Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam, that actually this whole thought, whatever has been understood, should be reconstructed for gender, minorities, freedoms, political freedoms. Just to give you an example, for example, this shura, the concept of shura. So when he will be interpreting وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَ بَيْنَهُمْ, so he will say it's actually a compulsion on Muslims, because the amr, the sigha amr, comes for a system, and it's a compulsory thing, it's a mandatory thing on the Muslims to to have an elected representative government, and that government should have actually a public support, and when it loses the public support, it should go back to the pavilion. So, yeah, 3 minutes. So, he organized his scholars, I would call it textual communities, as well as interpretive communities, discourse communities, both online as well as, physical. It has become a huge movement now among the middle classes, specifically women. And there are, of course, I can't discuss it in 3 minutes, but actually this whole reconstructionist project was done, as a social non-movement, because he was not in the public square, but, redefining, reconstructing the very basic, essential concepts, and then presenting them as a research output, presenting and sharing with the public. The last one is the women's marches, which is called the Aurat March. It has become a huge phenomenon. I think Dr. Azim also wrote a piece on this. And although it is having some controversies as well, because to counter it, there is a Haya March from the religious, and Islamist women circles. It is always facing these challenges from all different sections of society. And, the women marches, again to use Bayat, the art of the presence. So, refusing to withdraw, to surrender from what you say in the public square, and reiterating, asserting your position again and again in the public square, and that has led to the non-movement, which has become almost a social movement now. So I'm looking at the time, it is just 44 seconds. So the time pressure is a lot. Just to conclude, I would say there is a lot actually going on in the non-movement phase. I consider ILN as a non-movement, which is in the realm of, both religious reform, as well as politics, as well as influencing policy. For example, this discussion or such other discussions were taking place in Iran and Tunisia and Pakistan, for example, under ILN. Maybe many researchers and the media is not aware of it. But through producing new text, new knowledge, new discourse communities, new interpretive communities, and then bringing those ideas for larger discussion in the public, these are actually potent for larger social movements and social change in society. Sorry, the time is short, so I have to stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Husnul Amin, for the enlightening talk about this social non-movement in the Muslim-majority countries. I think it's very important that you quoted Asif Bayat, because I think most of us here are familiar with his work. It's not only about this the social non-movement, but also on post-Islamism. Yeah, he's a person who basically, to me, he was a person who introduced the term post-Islamism. Even though people argued there is someone else, Oliver Roy, but I guess that he was the first person to introduce this terminology of post-Islamism. Yeah, and he wrote about it. And our second speaker is from Turkey, Dr. Özlem Yilmaz, from Liberty and Democracy. She's a board and general coordinator of ALT, which basically stands for Association for Liberal Thinking, established in Ankara. And she's going to talk about liberty and democracy, a case of Turkey.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm greeting you all. Thanks for your patience at the session. Actually, as a board member of ILN, who has been involved since the beginning, it's also my great pleasure to have the achievements, to see the achievements of ILN as an independent civil organization who insists on these activities. This is not an easy task, actually, and thanks for the ILN team to trying to keep a high brand for Islam and Liberty Network for these intellectual activities. Since I have the floor, I have one last remark. I would like to send my thoughts and prayers to late Miss Linda Whetstone, who has really supported Islam and Liberty Network and tried to understand the needs of the Muslim world, the intellectual needs, requirements of the Muslim world, and she did her best to support the intellectual world for the Muslim world, as well as to contribute to a better understanding of non-Muslim world, or let's say so-called Western world, to create constructive approaches. Sending my thoughts and prayers. So we have, in this conference, we have talked twice about Turkey. So I would like to, hopefully I can, make you think about 2 or 3 issues, so as not to make repeated remarks. I would like to be as quick as possible. Thanks to Dr. Mesut in the first session, he made some remarks about the ambiguity about liberty. I would like to make you think about the relation between liberty and the institutions of democracy when we are talking about the applications of some countries, the challenges that some countries has experienced. Which I can talk about Turkey. You know, usually democracy in our country, in popular culture, it is the case. Democracy is used on behalf of liberty. Actually, it is the individual liberty, in essence, covering the right to life. We can change liberty and property, and there are civil liberties, religious freedom, freedom of expression, freedom of association, deriving from individual liberty, and they can be enjoyed in a liberal democratic system. As you see, those fundamental institutions of a liberal democratic system, private property-based market economy should not be forgotten in the end for a liberal democracy. So democracy in a pale form is mostly used in literature. However, it is clearly liberal democracy. People hesitate to use liberal in front of democracy, but we mean liberal democracy where the individual, the real minority is protected. So freedom can be secured, can thrive in a liberal democracy. On the other hand, can also be challenged by majoritarianism. Democracy is a redistributive system, so democracy is under risk of populism and rent economy. We can discuss afterwards or after this presentation. Even established democracies, for instance, Western countries, are under such risks. Before organizing this conference, we were discussing with Ali whether we should cover populism or not. My stance was that populism has not been the real focus at this stage for our countries, but still it is a risk and a problem. However, mostly the modern Western countries are under risk of populism in terms of protecting liberty, I mean, of course. And also, particularly European countries, established democracies, are under the risk of heavy growing regulations. So any liberal democratic system should have a dominance over intelligence bureaucracy to keep it responsible and accountable. As a liberal democrat, I would prefer the intelligence bureaucracy to be responsible, accountable to the elected government, so that I can keep it accountable and change it if there are problems. This is important, and also next to the intelligence bureaucracy, military bureaucracies are important, armed bureaucracies are important. This is the case both for the established democracies and also less established democracies. Elected governments should have the superiority over both the intelligence bureaucracy as well as over the armed bureaucracy. This should be clear, quite clearly defined. There could be crisis times where the equity, the balance between civil and military is examined. So this should be in favor of civil political elected governments, political legitimacy at these critical examination times. So an open competitive system, you can continue. In politics, civil life is crucial to protect our freedoms. Otherwise, the system becomes very fragile to the influence and dominance of bureaucratic organizations and established independent, centralized collectivist groups. They might not be within the bureaucracy. They might be dominant in other places, but anyhow, if we have these democratic institutions strong, such unlawful collectivist groups would not infuse in the system. I am not here, of course, talking about a democratic civil system where civil society has the ability to infuse and to influence the political system, somehow democratically decentralize the system and with the demands affecting the system. This is not what I am talking about. I am talking about illegal, illegitimate effect of collectivist groups over the democratic governments. So Turkey has been considered, we have talked, as a model for some time by the Muslim countries via complying Islam with democracy. Even if it was not a great model, it was really pleasing. A political party who had been known as a religious conservative party. I would not say Islamist, actually, because particularly Erdogan's group had differed from the earlier party as being a more modernist, reformist group. And they also preferred themselves to call as conservative Democrats. Still, I would not say Islamist to the earlier party as well. I can tell they were not fundamentalist, open to change. Anyway, so a religious conservative political party saying Islamist is an Orientalist approach, by the way. That means they are Muslim, they are not Christian, so they are Islamist. But we should find some kind of political identity position. They are a religious conservative party, leaning from being more statist, being more liberal, waving from one to the other. So I would say, anyhow, one country could not be a good example for other countries. Every country has her own cultures, features, history. But on the other hand, you hear different sides of the commentaries. One would find all the responsibilities of the faults on Erdogan and his government. The others would praise the government up on the hill. This is not easy. This is not fair to understand all the problems or all the achievements at all. So we need to find reasonable arguments and multi-arguments to understand. So, before this, yes, in yesterday's presentations, my colleagues, Dr. Bijan and Mustafa Acar, mentioned about the foundation of Turkish Republic. Turkish Republic founded in 1923, and we had single party system until 1950. So when Republic was founded, we were not a multi-party democracy. Until 1955, we had a single-party regime. CHP was leading that. Why I'm emphasizing this? Because CHP still keeps that mentality behind, as if it is the safeguard of the regime, as if it is the extension of the system, safeguard of the official ideology. So Turkey shifted in 1950 to a multi-party system, and in the formation of the republic, there had been three pillars. Three pillars: nationalism, statism, and secularism, I can say. Whenever any political party came up making some reforms, they had been accused of being traitors, and traitor of these three pillars. So we had, my colleagues mentioned military coup in 1960 and 1980. Through these military coup, a bureaucratic tutelage system had been established, and the political field had been very limited. Presidency, higher courts, they had been the safeguards of the regime. So whenever they try to make a reform, they had been, what happened? They had been surrounded by these institutions. So AKP had challenged this. AKP challenged this. We can talk about it. My colleagues divide AKP periods into two. In 2013, to some extent, it might make sense. Those are the Gezi protests. But after 2013, there had been important reforms, military courts had been removed. And there are so many, okay, I can see that. There had been so many important reforms. But on the other hand, taking the constituency behind, that is how happened. Erdogan and AKP government initiated peace resolutions. Started talks with PKK. So this is morally very important and superior. First time in Turkey's history, a government makes attempts about Kurdish issue, confronts with the problems in the past, and started talks with Alevite opinion leaders, and also made excuses against Armenians, and also gave back the private properties on non-Muslims. So you can imagine what a big challenge this towards the established ideas. This is not a matter of being in place in favor of Erdogan or AK Party. I would like to try to make the challenge of a democratic political party. So people of Turkey had struggled with the elitist, modernist, positivist attitude of CHP, and even if CHP has not been in power, these bureaucratic institutions. That is why people constituency favor an opposition line. So in the recent elections, what happened? Erdogan's government made big mistakes. The economy is awful. But we had this earthquake. The government had responded still with many failures quickly, and developed so many projects. Still, there are many problems within the parties, many problems within the etc. And I should say, constituency make comparative analysis. Unfortunately, we need an opposition in a democracy. The opposition should also support democracy, prepare proposals, and be an alternative. Unfortunately, CHP also provoked the immigrants, Syrian immigrants in Turkey, and introduced them as a big threat to the regime. Thanks to the constituency, they did not buy this argument. We can go to the final issue. So I would like to emphasize the importance of middle classes, of civil people, who would be the actual safeguards of a democratic system. We should continue. There are always challenges in to our systems, to our liberal democratic systems. Thanks for listening. That's over there, 0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Jonas. Thank you for sharing your ideas and your thoughts about the Turkish reform and the challenges over there. But I guess that you emphasize on the terms liberal democracy. That's very good, because I think we discussed about this yesterday as well, about the political liberalism as compared to economic liberalism. But I won't go into that. I just want to say that, when you have liberal democracy, you also have an illiberal democracy. And for those who are here, Malaysians who are here in this hall, we know how the current regime is moving towards illiberal democracy, right? Democracy is not only having election every 5 years. People say, okay, we have democracy because we have election every 5 years. But that's not it. Democracy is basically about liberty, right? About freedom. Freedom of expression, freedom of press. So when we don't have freedom of expression, we don't have freedom of press over here, like in this country, right? They closed down several portals, they closed down news portals, they closed down some TVs, right? Independent TVs, and they prohibited people from talking about certain issues, the 3R issues, and so on and so forth. These are evidence of illiberal democracy. And that's the problem in the Muslim world. Not only this in this country, but also everywhere in the Muslim world. And I guess that, it's very good that you share your experience in Turkey, especially about the AKP. And I guess that we need to know more about Turkish history as well, from Milli Salamat and so on, Saadet, and then to AKP and so on and so forth. Yeah, I think we go to the final speaker, Dr. Tauhidul Islam. He's an associate professor at the National Islamic University of Chittagong. He's going to talk about development and freedom in Bangladesh. Floor to you.
Thank you very much. I am very grateful to the organizers, especially Islam and Liberty Network, and most particularly Mr. Ali Salman, for inviting me to the conference and giving me the scope for presenting my paper here. The title of my presentation is Development and Freedom in Bangladesh. Development is, or the concept of development primarily has been concentrated within only economic development. And later on, the notion gradually modified to incorporate the fulfillment of basic needs, then different social aspects by different UN documents, particularly Sustainable Development Goals, Millennium Development Goals, and by the latest Human Development Index. Now, the concept of development incorporating two important aspects, economic aspects and social aspects. Social aspects basically incorporating access to healthcare, education, etc. But political aspects have been ignored in the definition of development. That was identified by Amartya Sen's development of freedom concept. Next, please. Development as freedom concept of Sen incorporated all the three aspects in the definition of development: political, social, and economic. He basically categorized 5 components to be examined to evaluate the development of a country, the development of a nation. Next, please. The first one, economic facilities, social opportunities, protective security, political freedom, transparency guarantees. So first one related to economic development, second and third related to social aspects, and fourth and fifth related to political development. That means now, or by development as freedom concept, 3 aspects have been incorporated in the concept of development. I have tried to evaluate my country, Bangladesh's development, taking this idea in center. For the first time after independence, my country, Bangladesh, in 1971, for the first time after establishing democracy in 1991, the ruling government or Awami League government has been ruling the country for more than 14 years, since 2008. Please. During this period of time, the country basically earned significant economic developments in terms of all economic indexes. For example, growth of GDP or foreign exchange reserve or just kind of all other indexes indicating to the development of the economic development of the country under the government. As we see, GDP, it was 6.5 in 2005 and 6.9 in 2021. It has been consistent after 2011, having more than 6, except 1 year for COVID-19. And per capita GDP, next please. In just kind of all economic indexes, the country basically earned huge achievements, it can be said. In terms of GDP, the country, it was 890 billion in 2008, and it became 1684.4 in 2021. Foreign exchange reserves, it was 5.79 only, but it now became 46.17 billion. So in just kind of many indexes, the country earned economic development. Next, please. Income equality has been consistent. There has been fluctuation in income inequality. Next, please. Poverty headcount ratio, it reduced basically. We see 48.9% in 2000, but it now became 20.5 at national poverty lines. Under poverty lines, 2.1 per day income. 2020 it was 30.3, and now in 2016 it became only 13.5%. So that all this indicating to the economic index of economic freedom, the country's overall score was 47.5 in 2009, and it became 54.4 in 2023, excepting some, as I identified here, judicial effectiveness, fiscal health, business freedom, labor freedom. In all other indexes, the country achieved a huge number of economic achievements. The country or the government prioritized some development projects. I mean, I identified as fast track project here, that also representing economic development. In terms of economic freedom, the country ranking second only after Bhutan, and surpassing India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Pakistan, or Maldives, according to Economic Freedom Index. So economically, the country achieved a lot. In terms of social indexes or social development, these are, please, next please. Next please. In terms of social indicators, the country also achieved remarkable achievements in almost all indicators, especially life expectancy, infant mortality, under 5 mortality rate. It has significantly been reduced, and the literacy rate, that also increased. Please. 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 The government has also initiated many social safety net programs that also indicating to the development of social aspects. Next, please. Next, please. Next, please. Next, please. in the political aspects, that is very different scenario. The country has a very different scenario in the development of political freedom. In all indexes, the country deteriorated drastically in all the indexes of political freedom. Press freedom index, it was 37 in 39. Before, please. 37.33, and it became 35.31. We should mention that in 2009, the Awami League government was taking over the power from a very military-backed caretaker government. So at that time, it was in a very critical situation, but the government could not improve the situation. Democracy Freedom Index, it was 5.87 in 2008. Consistently, it decreased, but since 2010, it is now consistent with 599. And Corruption Perception Index, the country, it was 24 and just 25 in 2023. Frugal State Index, the country was at 98.1. It was almost at the age of frugal state, but in that case, the country has a significant development, 85.2. And in the Freedom of the World report, overall score of the country is 49 in 2015, but it became 40. I mean, overall score in the Freedom of the World report, the country's score has reduced. Political rights, it was 20 in 2016, but it reduced to 15 in the Freedom of World report. Civil liberties, it was 27 in 2016. It reduced to 25 in 2023. So it can be said that the Freedom House has a different index for democracy, for measuring democracy or democracy index. But the country has not been listed among in the list of democracy index because of its, I see. So there are, could you please, next please. The government has initiated some acts, digital security acts or etc., which has many sections to that is non-bailable. If you criticize the government, if you criticize any ruling party political leaderships, or just kind of things that are related to the government, you can be detained, even you can be imprisoned for a lifetime. Just kind of very strict and very harsh acts have been introduced in the country that also indicated to the deterioration of political aspects. So in conclusion, I just can conclude with the statement that in terms of economic development, in terms of social development, during this period, since 2008 until today, the country has remarkable achievements, basically. But in terms of political development, in terms of political freedom, the country took hundreds of steps back. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tauhidul Islam. I think it's a very interesting talk. At least we have an understanding about what's happening in Bangladesh, right? There's so many of them over here in Malaysia, but we don't really know about their country. So I think it's very good. But I won't ask any question to you, but I was kind of perplexed when I saw the Gini index just now. remains stagnant at about 0.3, right? So because if you look at literatures and if you look at any studies being conducted all over the world, you'll see that any increment in GDP, normally there will be a reverse in the Gini index coefficient. For those who are not familiar with what Gini index is all about, Gini index is an index that talks about equality in the community, in the country. Meaning to say that if the Gini index is higher, then the income equality is higher between the rich and the poor. And if it's low, then it's lower, right? Between the rich and the poor. But there is nowhere in the world, even if you go to Norway or any of these Scandinavian countries, that you get a Gini index of 0. Yeah, there's no equal, what you call society in this country. No, you can't find that. Okay, it's a fantasy. Okay, it's something that you want to achieve but you can't achieve. Right, but it's interesting to see that the Gini index, the GDP increases with time, but Gini index remains stagnant, yeah, throughout the years, about 0.3, right, Dr. Tahirul? So, yeah, I guess we can go for this, into discussion about this, but it's interesting that we heard about Pakistan, we heard about Turkey, we heard about Bangladesh. These are very important countries in the Muslim world, and you have millions and millions of people living in these countries, right? Probably they form what? Half of the Muslim population, or 1/3 of the Muslim population in the world. So, but you see that we have 3 prominent speakers over here, and I think that it's time for us to listen from the floor. If you have any questions, you can direct to any of the speakers over here. Yep, Nick Ellen, please. Ten minutes. Okay, come. You can. Yeah.
Assalamualaikum.
Yep.
Nick Alin. Muhammad Abduh used to say, I went to the West and I saw Islam, no Muslims. I went to the East, I saw Muslims but no Islam. If we look at the Islamicity index, yes.
Islamicity index, yeah.
Denmark tops it all. Malaysia is number 46, I think. Bangladesh, I'm not sure, but why are all the Scandinavian countries, the ones who have no religion, coming in? I think we base it on like economic, legal and governance, human rights and politics, and international relations.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Islam. It's directed to Dr. Islam. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick.
Hi,
Imran?
Hi, my name is Imran Nordin. I have one question for Dr. Husnul Amin. It's about how the government react to the book reading and literature movement. Because I would like to compare it to what we have here in Malaysia, because regardless of whichever government that we have, the government will always scrutinize book industry, and we see confiscation and things like that. So when you say the real discussion happens behind the book activity, so how does the government, is the government happy or just allowing things to happen and things like that? Thank you.
Yeah, we can take one more. You have one more question? If no, yeah, you can start. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Should I respond?
Thank you very much. A question about Turkey. As a lover of Turkey, I would Turkey, as you prefer now. What are the conditions for Turkey to have its politics less intense? Because I think that if Turkey is going to continue with this level of intensity, with this level of polarization, whenever there are elections, whenever there are competition, and even beyond elections, I think it is not going to be sustainable. The situation is going to be dangerous. Are there any conditions you see, or is there any hope you see that things are going in the future, or the foreseeable future, to ease off a little bit, so that Turkish people stop seeing each other as enemies and maybe starting to build a kind of partnership between rival political parties without this animosity that is really not promising for the future.
Okay. Yeah, responding to your question concerning government's response, I think this is the beauty of non-movements, that they remain subtle and what Bayat calls the quiet encroachment. So, you know, the quiet encroachment remains quite invisible to the governments normally, specifically in our countries. And once it becomes a louder encroachment, it is having a visible, vivid social political presence, then it is controlled and surveilled as well. So I'll give you the example of for example, the women marches. You know, it has become now more visible and more vivid, and the encroachment is now louder on the street and in the public square. So there are resistance coming from all sections of society, including the state as well. But as far as the literary discussions are concerned, I think there may be very soon, I can predict that there will be some surveillance going on. So I give you another example of you. There is a Quetta tea cafes. Quetta is the city name of a city, and they like make good tea, very good kadak chai. So you know, these Quetta tea cafes are everywhere in Pakistan now, but you will see like hundreds of and thousands of youth specifically sitting and, you know, talking to each other, discussing politics, etc., etc. So during the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement phase, you know, I read this news that the security agencies are now specifically concerned about the discussions going on in Quetta tea cafes, you know. So I think there will be some surveillance as well, but that is not very much visible now.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. I would like to start with one issue that I had to miss in my presentation, which would be complementary about what I was trying to say. Since the Turkish system had a dual power system, established as a dual power system, since the political powers did not have real power over the system, these Gülenist group that you might have some idea about, religious civil education masked intelligence crime group infiltrated in the system. Instead of establishing a political party and competing with other parties, they preferred to infiltrate in the state organizations. And when the AKP government challenged the bureaucratic institutions, this was a challenge to the Gülenist group, that they were losing their power in democracy. So they attempted the coup plot on 15 July 2016. So unlike 1960, unlike 1980, civil people, be them pro-AKP or not, having the capital accumulation, strong independent civil circles, of course, with what Erdogan also did, initiated the resistance as well, but civil people resisted the coup attempt. I think this is very important. This is not a matter of being a side with a political party. It is important to keep the democratic system, the strong will of the people, of the citizens, to keep the democratic system. This was the glorious victory of civil people. So that's why this July 15 was important. Over this, of course, this had a traumatic effect. The coup plotters, affiliated people had been prosecuted, but members of Gülen people Members of Gülen are also prosecuted, but there are problems with that case, and it also created many other problems. But away from this issue, modern life now is different with social media. This polarization, I think, is not only the problem of Turkey. United States, when we look at the society in the United States, in very small areas, in very small issues, people are separated from each other to different camps. The real risk about Turkey is not the polarization between secularists, conservatives, liberals. Actually, the problem, to me, derives from the incapability of the opposition party to carry the demands of the opposition people well enough. And they do not take part in positive, constructive issues which is relevant for everyone in the country. But the real risk for the country comes from those people, even some political groups, who try to provoke against the immigrants. They are peaceful people. Immigrants are peaceful people. However, some groups, harsh groups, are being provoked against those people. This is the real risk. Next to them, still, PKK is a terrorist organization. However, in different circles, in different environments, they are not being denied, although they are using violence. I am not against, but in a liberal democracy, a political party who has an affiliation of a terrorist group can hardly be accepted. For instance, a political party extension of Daesh can be accepted in US parliament. I doubt so. So we should also have a consensus about struggling, about fighting against terrorism over the country. But in terms of polarization, it's a general problem all over the world, a general modern problem. Thank you. Tevhidül, I'm sorry.
Sorry, we have a very limited time left, so maybe we can wrap
It's
up.
okay, just 30 seconds. Thank you for your question about Islamicity Index. You see Islamic practices in West countries are not Islam in East or Muslim countries. I think it could be a different agenda for discussion, but to me, that is a result of long colonialism in Muslim countries. That is my short answer, but it could be a different agenda for discussion. Thank you.
I would like to thank all the three speakers and for the questions from the audience, and I think we can close the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmad Farouk Musa and all the esteemed speakers for the wonderful session. I would now like to invite Dr. Farouk to present a token of appreciation to the speakers. Thank you, Dr. Farouk and all the speakers.